welcome everyone. This is the Temporal Office Hours that was renamed to Temporal Community Meetup, mainly because we wanted to emphasize that it's a community meetup, so we hope that more and more people from the community present their use cases, their problems, and their solutions, which would be really helpful to the rest of the other community members. I'm Sean, I'm head of developer experience at Temporal, and yeah, I'm just hosting today. We have a pretty cool agenda, so let's get started. You can, well, I think most of you already signed up for these event calendar. We'll basically be hosting most of these events here, and really our goal is to just seed a community meetup. Hopefully in future we'll have more in-person meetups again, but also to essentially get an attendance list that we can eventually build up to prove that we have enough demand for a user conference, which I think would be very, very nice. We do have a Temporal job board. If you're not currently working with Temporal, this is open to most people. So let's so actually I'm happy to feature one of the jobs that was recently listed. So if you don't know, our job board not only lists jobs from us, it also lists jobs from our users. And one of the newest ones was from Nicholas from Script. And this is for a backend role on his team. And you can read more about them in their case study over here. And yeah, it will be a pretty cool job working with Temporal in production. And they're one of our earliest users, which is pretty cool. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to go right into the agenda with a pretty packed schedule. So today we're going to talk about Airbyte with Abhi and Jared, and then we're going to talk about Temporal CLI with Ruslan, Temporal Web with Kinney, and then we'll have a general Q&A. And we have a lot of Temporal staff on hand available to answer any of the questions you may have. Abhi and Jared, are you on?
Yes, we're both on.
Yeah, we're here.
And I see Abhi. I'm not sure I hear you. Okay, hang on. All right, I think I can hear you now.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah, hello?
Okay.
Yes, I had my speaker off. Okay, so thanks for doing this, guys. So the context of this is that you were our latest partners for our case study, and I've heard a lot about Airbyte. I'm not personally much in the ELT space, but I've heard a lot about Airbyte. I've been digging a little bit into the whole Fivetran and DBT and all that space. So yeah, do you guys want to introduce yourselves and we can talk a little bit about Airbyte?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Abhi. I run developer relations and developer experience at Airbyte. And Jared, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm an engineer at Airbyte. I've worked a lot on our core platform, which involves how we schedule jobs to run, which is why we're here to talk about Temporal today.
Yeah, awesome. And we can talk a little bit about, I guess, what you do. So ETL is kind of like a newish concept, to me at least, because ELT. So like, I think it seems like you facilitate the difference between like the ELT process, and it's more of an open source pluggable system than let's say a competitor like Fivetran. Is that right?
Yeah. So essentially, the big problem in the market right now is that closed source vendors like Fivetran and Stitch, it's very difficult to, I guess, like basically create data sources or to use data sources that don't exist within the platform. The ones that are vetted and the ones that exist are powerful and they work well. But the problem is that people have all kinds of different data sources. People have all kinds of different needs. There's security needs where companies don't want to basically have data leave their VPC. And one of the biggest things is that we want people to just enable people to just move data from one place to another while hosting it on their own infrastructure. And that was kind of like how Airbyte was formed, because the need for that was somehow, with all the ETL and ELT products in the space, the need for that kind of still existed. So an open source model where people would be able to come in and develop their own connectors really easily and would be able to be managed by the open source team is essentially why Airbyte came to be.
Do I have to be a data engineer to use you? Like, what is the target sort of audience?
That's a great question, actually. So more and more, we find that data analysts are essentially able to basically come into Airbyte, deploy it in 1 minute, come to the UI, and immediately start syncing data. It takes about we've made basically the UI experience as simple as possible. We want pretty much anyone to be able to move data. So you do not need to be a data engineer to run or deploy Airbyte. To develop your own connector, we're actually starting to make it more and more so that we're kind of like eventually trying to head towards a no-code experience even for that. We have a connector development kit, which allows you to kind of like write about like 75% of the boilerplate for if you're trying to create any data source. So we're trying to basically target this towards data engineers and data analysts.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting this. So my personal background is I used to be a trader and a hedge fund analyst. So I was a de facto data analyst without actually knowing that I was a data analyst. And back then I was kind of doing my own data transformation and pipeline stuff with just Python in my own bare hands. I think maybe more people have to realize that a lot of people touch more data than they think. You don't actually necessarily have to carry the title of data analyst.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how many people end up recreating Airbyte within their own like project or within their own company. I think I see about like three or four posts on Reddit every week, like basically talking about how they're trying to create their own data pipeline. So this is kind of like something that a lot of people have. Yeah, a lot of people are data analysts or data engineers without even kind of like thinking about it. So we kind of want to extend our hand out to the community and help people and saying, hey, you really don't need to recreate this. We got you on that one.
Let's take a look at what sources you have. You have tons.
It's actually really funny, but we hear that same thing with Temporal all the time, where people come and they built like their own version of Temporal in-house, and they couldn't imagine that someone could build a generic version of that technology. It's super relatable.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot here. Okay, awesome. So one thing I don't understand, I guess, is whenever people say they're open source, and this is something that we struggle with as well. What part is open source? Is like all of it?
Yeah, pretty much for now, everything's open source. You can see the implementation for, like as you were hovering over the HubSpot connector. If you go to like Airbyte, if you go to our GitHub repo, if you go to Airbyte integrations, under a GitHub repo, and then go to connectors, go to and then go to source HubSpot. That's pretty much it. That's all of the code for the HubSpot connector. So pretty much we just as kind of a heads up, we are having a cloud model, but that's essentially what we're doing with Airbyte Cloud is we're kind of just hosting it. We're hosting it for you and doing all of the management for you. Now, like as of now, we pretty much have everything. Everything's in the open. There's nothing except for, I guess, the cloud product and the infrastructure that's behind closed source right now.
Got it. Okay, perfect. And that sets me up to talk a little bit about the system that you had before Temporal. Like, talk to me about the problems that you're facing.
Jared, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So before Temporal, it was as Ron was saying, we decided to build it in-house at first as we were scaling it up. So to explain a little bit about the types of jobs we're actually executing, people run Airbyte on either Docker Compose, so that's usually on a single computer somewhere, like a VM somewhere, or they run it on Kubernetes. And what they're doing under the hood is like all those connectors that Abhi was mentioning in the repo here. Ultimately, every connector is packaged as a Docker container. So what we want to do at the end of the day is run these like sources and destinations from their container, and we want to pipe data between the two of them to sync data from a source to the destination. So what we were doing before for that was a completely manual method of tracking all of the schedules and like the kind of the main loop of iterating through all of the jobs that might need to exist, and then deciding that, oh, well, a sync is supposed to happen now. We want to launch a connection between this specific piece and this specific destination. But along the way, there are also a lot of edge cases where we're doing specific interactions with a Docker container that are more one-off or like from a user's experience, nearly synchronous. And a lot of those were things that we didn't really have a separate way of expressing in our framework because it was very simple. So we also picked up from Temporal the ability to turn some of those into like actual synchronous calls via Temporal, and kind of restructure how we look at scaling out the workers that are able to run jobs for us.
What specific feature was that? If
Yeah, so in Temporal, so for us, we are interacting with a connector, so like a source, for example. There are different interactions that someone has with it. They might want to read data, for example, from a source. They might want to check to see if certain credentials that they're providing can access that API, and that check, for example, is what we want the more synchronous behavior from Temporal for, because we want a user to be able to like check for that value and retrieve it directly. And while before we had our own like custom management process of like detecting whether or not a job reached a certain state and returning that value to the user.
Yeah, it sounds like you were you're talking about this like a one system, but I think one part of the case study that really struck me was that you also had each team implementing their own domain-specific solution. Can you go a little bit more into that?
So sorry. What do you mean by each team going into?
So like there was, I don't know, there's a mention of like individual teams implementing this for each like connector or something like that. I'm not sure if I misinterpreted that.
Oh yeah, so there's so we have a lot of people working on different parts of this system, and one of the things that we're looking at we were looking at doing with Temporal was to completely isolate all of the scheduling logic in such a way that people on the like connector team especially wouldn't have to interact with our scheduling process at all, and it would be pretty much transparent. So we wanted a way to easily plug these connectors that we're building into the platform that schedules them. So if somebody's actually like running a connector or like writing a connector the first time, they don't need to think about the scheduling problem at all, and it's something that's completely hidden from them. And Temporal, since it allowed us to draw clear lines of the boundaries of our scheduling system, it made it easier for connector teams to work independently.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so let's talk about like, so you were evaluating alternatives. Let's talk about the decision space. Like, how do you make a decision? Like, essentially, you had something kind of working. How do you evaluate the competitors or alternatives?
Yeah, so we were hitting boundaries in terms of what we were building internally. It was something where there was additional functionality that we wanted to use that was available in a number of different platforms for scheduling, and we just didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and we needed to select something to do it. So some common, at least like within the ELT or ETL space, like a very common option for scheduling is Airflow. And Airflow actually isn't very applicable for us specifically because we need we want to be able to programmatically define a high number of workflows with a lot of configurability. And we also want certain operations like to be very low latency. So for something like checking if credentials are valid for a specific source, that's an operation that we want to take seconds or a second from the user's perspective. But if you're doing something with Airflow where you're like creating a like DAG in a file, and then it needs to be picked up by the system, and then it needs to be scheduled and run, it's not something where you can actually interact with that very easily. And so we looked at other options, and there are a few options where you can programmatically like create workflows and then like read their results very, very rapidly. But Temporal just provided a very nice API around it and made it very easy for us to wrap the different components into separate like workflows and activities. And we're still kind of at the early stage, but it fit it fit its API fit our platform fairly well. So it's easy to plug in, and also something where it looked like it would be easier to extend in the future, which was not something that we really saw on other platforms. So the APIs basically feel more like there's more lock-in where, like, if we wanted to, well, like when we initially went to Temporal, basically what we did was we refactored just slightly to fit the workflow layer, and then we plugged into Temporal, and it was almost that easy. While for the other platforms, it's a much higher effort to rework the structure of your internal processes to fit in that new model, because it doesn't like feel like you're just using code. It's something where you're actually using like an entirely different data model and reliant on that data model for interacting with the operations you want to perform.
Like a modeling problem, like you know the shape of the business problem that you have, and having to fit it to Airflow versus modeling it with code is important to you.
Yeah, exactly. And while Airflow wasn't an option because of like the high minimum latency for different operations, we did look.
Is it 30 seconds? Because I've been trying to nail this down, and I can't find an authoritative source.
Yeah, I'm not exactly positive. We did some experimentation, but it was something where like if you are, yeah, I don't want to say the wrong numbers here, but it was something where like for our Docker Compose version on Temporal, for example, like checking a connection for like a Postgres database takes like a second end to end, and that's a brand new workflow, or like that's true for basically any connector that you're working with where the image is already downloaded on the machine for that Docker image. It takes like under a second, and that's something where it's not even close to that on some of these other platforms.
Got it. Okay. Cool. Yeah, and then you mentioned a little bit about Temporal. So what specific advice do you have for people migrating, since you went through the whole process recently?
Yeah, so I think one thing to like look out for is kind of the configuration store. You want to make sure that you have good defaults. We're in kind of a unique case because we're offering Temporal like embedded within our releases. So in the same way that we have like a Postgres database in our Docker Compose, where we're just like, we store all of our data in our Postgres DB, we're just including the temporal image to interact with as well, and we're connecting that to our Postgres DB. So tuning defaults there and understanding like minimum resource requirements to be able to use like temporal and all of your other pieces is very important. I think the one type of error that our users have seen from temporal have ultimately been from like the one class of errors that we have seen from our community related to temporal are related to like machine limitations of them like running out of resources basically, and starving like Postgres out of the resources it needs to like serve temporal requests. And that's so there are certain like that's the main class of problems that we've seen with temporal in the wild with thousands of users running Airbyte. So I'd say that the biggest thing to focus on is like make sure that your workflow and activity abstraction fits the requirements of temporal. So like make sure you're not doing threading that you're not supposed to, and also make sure that you're allocating the correct resources required to run Postgres and everything else and temporal. I know that probably doesn't affect a lot of people, but in our case, we have some very like disk and memory intensive jobs, and if people are running on like a single machine somewhere, then it's very common for our users to run into that sort of problem. So understanding those like your use cases and the resource demands of the rest of your system is important. But outside of that, we've really been very happy with the stability of Temporal in general.
Awesome. Cool. I'm going to share the link to the case study in the chat, and I'm going to open it up to questions. If anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself or say hi or type it in if you don't want to be on the microphone. But otherwise, Jared and Abhi, I just want to ask, apart from Temporal, apart from this whole migration with us, what other trends are you seeing in the industry that you're looking at, or at the tools that you're excited by?
That's a very big question. So there are a lot of tools. There are a lot of interesting. Yeah, so I think probably the biggest thing that we're interested in are various streaming platform tools. There are a lot of use cases that we see long term for Airbyte supporting more like streaming use cases and making it easier to fit into those platforms. So I think we're keeping an eye on some of the new players in that space, like Estuary, for example, which is a new like streaming platform that is starting to write out Airbyte protocol. So like we have a protocol for our connectors, and they're starting to write streaming connectors for their platform. So I'd say like streaming tools in general are what we're most focused on. Avi, do you have any other industry areas that you feel we should highlight?
Yeah, I think something that I've recently found out about, and I think people are starting to evaluate and check out, is Firebolt as a data warehouse. I think right now, like the space was kind of really owned by Amazon and Google pretty much, and Snowflake. So it's like I think this is one of the interesting trends that I've seen in terms of like for price to performance. Like a lot of people are saying like Firebolt's kind of like the Goldilocks of data warehouses right now, and I personally have not evaluated it, but in terms of trends, I think I'm starting to see that a little more. So I guess in terms of like the ETL space or the data integration space, I think that's probably one of the only things that I've heard of off the top of my head.
Probably that, and also Delta Lake and more like data lake style approaches to warehouses for data. So Airbyte is focused on bringing basically three categories of data sources, like files, database contents, and like data that's hidden behind an API, and bringing that into a warehouse of some kind. And in most of these cases, it's something like something like Redshift or BigQuery or Snowflake. But there are an increasing number of use cases where they want to use tools like Delta Lake and, as Abhi said, Firebolt, things like that to store their data in kind of a different paradigms.
Oh yeah, one more thing is that I think is actually pretty hot right now. I don't know if you've heard of LakeFS. Yeah, LakeFS is pretty hot. It allows you to kind of do this. It allows you to do a kind of like a GitHub like style versioning system for object storage, and I think that's I think it's going to be super hot. I'm really excited to see how this project moves forward. I think they have like like we did some kind of like a collab, some co-op content with them where they kind of piped in data using Airbyte to basically a version like S3, basically an S3 branch, and then basically used Airbyte to kind of like manage to manage data integration between like different like branches of essentially clones of their S3 repositories. So it's a very interesting technology. I think it's I think they'll probably get a little more notice in the upcoming months.
Perfect. That's all the time that we have, unfortunately. But if anyone has experience using these, it sounds like Jared and Abhi are actively exploring these. So hit them up in the comments or in the Slack channel. Thanks so much, Jared and Abhi. Anything to plug, by the way? Any jobs, any blog posts, any social media, whatever?
Absolutely. I mean, check out our blog at airbyte.io/blog. We're currently hiring a PM. So if you have any PM experience, we'd love to get to know you. We really want to kind of like accelerate, because we just raised some funding, and we're going to basically be launching Airbyte Cloud pretty soon. So we're definitely accelerating around that, and we have some other openings. Obviously, if you're an engineer, we'd love to have you, but I know we're competing with a lot of people for that, and including yourself, Sean and Round. Yeah, if you're we have our head of product management, and especially that technical product manager position. That's kind of the main one that we're looking to fill right now. But thank you so much for having us here, and we hope that Jared and I were able to give you some insight into the Airbyte projects.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience, and hope to see you around in Slack and chat. Awesome. Yeah, cool. Okay, so we're going to keep moving along. That was awesome from Airbyte, and definitely looking forward to seeing more collaboration between our teams and theirs. I can't believe they're just a year old. It's pretty wild. Okay, so next we're going to have Ruslan presenting on tctl. Ruslan, you on?
Yeah. So Sean, if you are able to also enable the poll,
Yes.
I would like to have it. Yeah. So hello everyone. My name is Ruslan. I work at Temporal at one user interface, including tctl, which is Temporal CLI. So what I'm going to share you is, okay, hopefully you see my screen. So I want to give more love to tctl and just address many issues that it had, especially in terms of user experience. It was lacking in a number of areas. And yeah, so specifically, as an example, I will be showing you two CLIs. One is the old one, and one is the new one. Okay, let's see if the polls, by the way, are available.
So it looks like I have to create the polls every time from scratch. So
oh, okay.
I'm wondering if
okay, then
did not work.
yeah.
I'll type.
You know what I'm gonna do? Okay, sounds good. Okay, so I'll probably just share this in the chat. You can just comment. So first of all, the question is, have you used tctl? Maybe you can say like often, rarely, or no. And also your experience with tctl. You can, okay, basically a smiley face or just like, okay. Yeah, so who used tctl, please share your experience. And I'm going to share the the changes. Okay, so let's look at the old tctl and the new tctl, and I'm going to be showing you what was changed. Okay, so I'll start with the output formatting. So before, some of the commands would have formatting such as tables, JSON. Some of the commands would not have it. It was super inconsistent. Then also, if you let's just randomly run a command, tctl workflow list. So if you, for example, would list workflows, you would be pretty much stuck with those fields. There are some options to customize this. For example, this command, workflow list command, gives you options to, for example, attach a memo, search attributes. But again, this is just hard-coded into this specific command, and some other commands will not have it. And basically, the tctl was lacking at consistency and customization options. So I'm going to show you the new experience on this side. So right now, you get this option to, first of all, choose how you format the output. So for example, you can have a table. Here it is, the new one. Then JSON, and this is available for all of the commands that do some printing. So this is generic solution that works just for basically all of the commands. So output is JSON. There's also a card which can be useful for example, in combination with grep. Let's pick run IDs. So I'm getting all of the run IDs. So the output flag is available for commands like workflow list, workflow start. In the start, you will see history. You can customize however you want. Next thing about customizations. So I mentioned you changing the fields, right? Changing the, for example, if I want to show a memo here, another column, then this specific command would give me this option, but this is hard-coded. So in the new experience, you have a more generic approach. So you have these fields. Let me just copy. Okay, so you have this fields option, and right now I'm just gonna try some fields that doesn't exist. And what happens is that it shows you error message, but basically it helps you. It gives you an output what kind of fields are available for this command. And let's here let's just randomly copy type name, close start time, and close time, and pass it to fields. And what happens is that we see the fields that we've actually chosen to print. Oh, let me zoom in a little and try again. Okay, let me know if it's too small. I'll zoom again. Okay, so as you can see, the output has now type name, start time, and close time. Some other customization options include, for example, let's look at the start time, generally just like field times. So here we have the time, but we don't have date, right? And again, all tctl will give you a few options. Oh, here's the poll, by the way. Okay, so we see that majority of people would use. Okay, so many people say it's okay.
You can actually see it on the screen share, by the way.
Oh, okay. So you are able to open the polls, and generally the summary is that only 13% people said it's great. The rest saying it's okay, and it has issues 0%. Okay, I'm surprised about 0% on has issues. Anyway, let's continue. So there are some options to customize the time formats, but again, this is hard-coded for specific commands. Some commands will not have it. Here in the old tctl, you would be able to print as row time and daytime, but this is it. In the new tctl, first of all, you may notice that the default time format is now relative. So let's say you just created a workflow, you just started it. So you can quickly see that, okay, so it will say something like 10 seconds ago. You can customize this. Let's change time format, and let's change it to ISO. And we see now the start time is printed as ISO. Yeah. Okay, so next thing, let's also look at, oh yeah, so pagination. Okay, so in the old tctl, let's say if you wanted to print JSON and also pipe it into a JQ. So let's just try this out and see what happens. We choose to print as JSON. Let's try to print basically all items that exist and pass to JQ. And as we can see, we just receive an error because what happens is that this prints improper JSON. It's because of the pagination in details, but basically this is improper JSON. So you are not able to pass to properly pipe into different tools. So in the new tctl, again, the flag has changed. Just keep in mind, it was print JSON, now it's output JSON. And let's print to JQ. And yeah, so we get this output as JQ. We can customize if we want to use some options here. We can also limit the number of items. Let's also again print as JSON, but also limit the number of items. Let's just say 1. So okay, wait a minute. Let's also disable pagination. So we'll just have 1 item, the full item. Yeah. So as you can see, this is 1 JSON object. Yeah. So use this limit command. This is also a new one. Okay, so then the next thing about pagination is that some people may have your favorite pager environment variable set. So many tools respect this variable, so we do respect it now too. So, so let's say if you set your pager environment variable to, let's say that, and oh, 1 moment. Okay, and try to print again workflow list. No, it's deleted, accept. I'm a bit. Okay, this is correct, right? Okay, let's.
What do you want to export, not echo?
Oh. Right. Yeah, my mistake. Okay, so let's try again workflow list, and I chose bat as the pager. So if we now try to print, we see the output is printed into a bat, right? So you can choose any pager that you like. Yeah, so this is something you can do now. Okay, then the last thing that I'm going to mention, there's actually more items. There's in total 14 different proposals changes, but the last one that I want to mention is the configuration. So let's start a new to not have the pager set. Okay, so I've mentioned to you that you can change the output, right? So you can, let's say, customize the fields that you print, and so I'll print those fields. But now it's a bit complicated to just like always add fields. It's probably not something you want to do. So what the new feature is? The new feature is the config feature, which basically allows you to configure some defaults for the flags, configure your own commands. So for example, you can select a different namespace. So let's say you use with accounting. So you would be able to set a default namespace, so you don't have to specify in every single command. Next thing, I'm not going to set to accounting because it's going to break my tctl. I'm going to set the default, so it gives you this the message that okay, now it's default. And also let's create a command, custom command. So I'm going to set an ls and say my command. This is similar to how Git does this. So, and now pass, let's say, workflow list, and let's say I want to output as JSON by default using this command, right? So let's try now execute this command, my command. So this is the one that we've passed here. You can pass anything here. So tctl my command, and we see it prints as JSON. So you can also, let's say, customize fields, set fields, your favorite fields. Yeah. So yeah, so you can configure and have your own defaults. This is then saved into this configuration file. Let's look at it. So it has this ls sequence, and here's the command that I've just created, and also the default namespace. Yeah. So this is a short overview. There are more items. You can view the rest of the changes in the proposals repository. They are usually marked as tctl and something. Yeah, there are also some upcoming changes. You can look at them here. Investigate. Also, your feedback is super important. That's why this is in proposals, because we're looking for feedback. It's it's super helpful. Okay, so this is a high-level overview of the next tctl, when it's going to be available. So the most so the close availability is that I'm expecting probably in the somewhere during the closest weeks. So, but however, it's not going to be the default experience for some time until we decide to make it the default. So you will be able to switch to the new experience, saying tctl config set version to next. And once you do this, it's going to use the new experience. And at some point in the future, we'll make it the default experience. Yeah, so those are some of the changes, upcoming changes for tctl on user experience. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, please ask. Also, if you look into proposals, please leave some comments. If you maybe have some suggestions. The repository is temporalio./tctl. So if you want to look at the code, it's here. Yeah, thank you. If you have any questions, please welcome.
Any questions for anyone using CLIs? Any favorite features that you think we should copy? If none, and
okay, so we'll see. Maybe sometime in the future we'll have a new survey and see whether it changes the ratings. Okay, thank you for your time.
Yes, thanks, Ruslan. Great work so far. Okay, so I think. Oh, did someone say something? I think Steve was unmuting himself and I was on his microphone. So next up we have Steve presenting on Temporal Web. Steve, why don't you take it away?
Hello. All right, let me share my screen and we'll get this show started. So we're going to take a look at the new kind of temporal UI that we're working on. And this is, a very early days project. We started in earnest about 6 weeks ago. And so kind of laying down some of the infrastructure as well as some of the initial assumptions that we wanted to make. That said, as with most things at Temporal, and I think, friends at Airbyte also pointed this out, we do most of our development in the open. So what we wanted to do was kind of talk a little bit about some of the core principles and other kind of assumptions that we're making going in, kind of just like begin to kind of do this out in the open and also like solicit feedback, kind of questions, any place that you kind of in your, have something you want to see kind of, and just start that conversation going. And this is as I'll say in a second, like true across as like Ruslan just said with like tctl, as long as our like SDKs and everything along those lines, which is just to build a best-in-class experience, right? Like when you use Temporal, like obviously the technology should be rock solid and reliable, but the act of using it should also like make you we're just trying to get you all promotions, right? Just make you as effective at your job as possible, and it should be as frictionless as possible. One of the things as I was interviewing at Temporal, like I have accidentally had a career in working on developer-focused, the UIs of developer-focused tooling for the last like several years, and typically speaking, like a lot of dashboards and stuff like that aren't always like a kind of first-class citizen, right? And so a big focus was very early on. One of the things that we think can, help everyone that's building with Temporal is having, like we said, a really great kind of user interface for seeing and understanding what's going on with your workflow executions and activities. So, starting now, like we really want to make sure that we're investing heavily in building a best-in-class UI. And again, like I will say this because it bears repeating, that is why we want to show you the earliest versions right now to kind of like engage you in the process and get as much of your kind of insight and experiences as possible. So I'm mostly just teeing you up for like comments and questions at the end of this. So this is the first of a series of check-ins, right? Like I kind of alluded to earlier, and I just continue saying like we value feedback, but this is kind of showing our work early and often, and kind of involving you in the process. So go over some of the principles of what we're thinking as we are kind of designing both the like infrastructure architecture as well as the actual user experience itself. a lot of these will not be particularly controversial, but I think that they are super useful for kind of understanding our thinking around this. First principles that it should be fast, right? And then again, that goes without saying, nobody has a principle of like, no, the UI should be as slow as possible, right? But we mean fast in a number of ways. Obviously, like we want the UI to be, responsive and fast to load and all the things that we come to expect from a modern web application experience, but also making sure that the act of using it is also something that you can kind of get to what you need incredibly quickly. Like if you are trying to, look at a particular aspect of a workflow, we want to make sure that you can get to it quickly. So, we've seen a bunch of patterns around this over the last few years, the kind of command palette in Visual Studio Code, or the, Command K or Command T, depending on what platform you're using, Slack, to kind of jump around places and kind of just be able to like, kind of, we're developers, right? Like keyboard shortcuts are our friends. That should be like a first-class principle as well. So kind of designing that interaction as well as just also like the table stakes for a modern web UI. Also, it should be intuitive. One of the things that Sean wrote up in one of his principles is like we should have like best in class documentation, but also our UI should also be part of the, you should be able to like kind of learn and onboard onto Temporal as you kind of like navigate around the UI as well. And so, obviously it's first and foremost, in his current version, a way to kind of see what's going on with your workflows, but kind of also understand the system and also be able to do some higher level actions over time. One of the things right now, if you log into the current version of the web UI, you'll see like a list of your workflow executions. You kind of like look for the one that you need, but like we'd love to bubble up some higher level metrics as well. So you can kind of get a state of, get a sense of the overall state of the workflows that you're kind of commanding, for lack of a better word. And in a second, like after we get to the principles, I'll show you some screenshots of the current UI. I didn't want to tempt the demo deities per se, but we'll show you some screenshots, and we'll also show you some of the mockups that Sean's been working on in order to kind of get a sense of like what's coming in, like kind of a little bit more like of a tangible quality to some of the stuff that we're talking about. And then some other little things are just missing in the current version of the UI, right? Like we want to make sure that like if things have changed with your workflow, like we're showing you that on the page, we're updating kind of as the system is moving along the time-space continuum, and kind of have all of that kind of stuff in place. And lastly, like, temporal of your infrastructure, you're building things on top of it. So we need to be able to have, you can plug your own tooling, collect logs, kind of plug in your own infrastructure as well, and kind of build in that programmability piece into the to the system as well. For fans of front-end engineering, the kind of technologies built on we're building a REST server on top of our gRPC client, kind of using Go, and then pulling that, generating types on the fly, and pulling that into a UI that we're going to Svelte and the Svelte kit, which is giving us a lot of the table stakes out of the box, where we are kind of compiling our templates at build time rather than doing it all at runtime, and kind of making sure that we're getting some of the modern web features, for free. So, just some other things we'll kind of see this. Like generally speaking, if you get to the UI in a given state, we want the URL to reflect that. So if you bookmark a given view and you go back to it, everything should be the way that you saw. You don't have to re-navigate through a bunch of stuff. You need to share it to somebody on your team. That's the thing as well. If you are, Ruslan just showed you a lot of the new stuff with tctl. We want to make sure that like, if you get to a place in the UI, you can figure out also how to do that in tctl, and then ideally in back and forth in either direction. So whichever view is most helpful for you getting your work done, we're basically able to kind of help you along the way with that. So this is the kind of early days, and we're in Denver, as we noted, are kind of going through lots of little tweaks in this UI, and kind of moving stuff around and kind of figuring out the best way and kind of running through it. But this is kind of the a screenshot from yesterday of what we had. You can kind of see that it's at the very least a little easier on the eyes as well, but kind of just give you a sense of some of that, so you can actually see, instead of like navigating directly in a workflow, you can get a high level overview of that workflow without leaving the context of your overall executions. But you can also dig deeper into a given workflow execution, kind of see some of the details around that as well. as well as the events. And like, you know, some of the stuff is, again, early days, but as we begin to refine that and figure out what the most important information, both giving you access to all the information, and then as well as figuring out what the most high level information. One of the great things about Temporal is that like we use it internally. So like we're already getting lots of like feature requests and stuff from engineers at the company. So a lot of this is kind of changing, but like as well, like want to make sure the floor is open for you as well. And here's an example of when things get slow in a front end app, right? That wasn't Zoom lagging, that was literally my browser struggling. So this is a mock-up that Sean did with some of those high-level views as well. Kind of be able to begin to batch together your workflows and kind of show you those higher level details that you're having to necessarily like run through it all yourself and compile that data, just making it easy for you to kind of see those things. And then also being able to kind of get a sense of, for a given type of workflow, rather, you know, you can just see some of the stuff in filters now, but kind of just making sure that all the things you might commonly need to do is easier to get done. And kind of, again, some more of the kind of sidebars, you can kind of navigate around very quickly. You can kind of see that Command K piece, switching namespaces, so on and so forth as well. So like I mentioned in the beginning, as with most things at Temporal, we're working on it out in the open. It's still early days, but we've made the repo public, so you can see everything going on. And our goal is to do this on a regular basis and kind of give you updates and solicit more feedback and stuff along those lines as we begin to build this out. So with that, I will kind of open up the floor for any questions, comments, concerns, cries of outrage.
I just want to say I gave Steve the 5-minute mark, and he basically ended in exactly 5 minutes. So that's a mark of true speaking experience. Thanks. Yeah, obviously a work in progress, but hopefully people. I know a lot of you listening are interested in a better developer experience, especially the UI side. So we're working hard at it, and that's why we're actually all here in Denver. That's Steve right there talking to you, and we're all getting together. So yeah, questions, please. We have in the remaining 5 minutes, pretty much the full team of Temporal here, ready to answer your questions. And if no questions, we can also just talk about.
Someone has a question in the chat.
All right. Max, do you wanna just speak out your question?
Yes. Hi everyone. Thanks Temporal team for the great presentation. It's the first time I'm here at this meetup. Really like it. Thank you. So yes, we are actively evaluating the temporal applications within our company, and we have the very specific question about the namespace authorizations and how they handle. So it's like we are a relatively big company and we have like multiple product teams, but at the same time we are trying to unify how the workflows are going to be handled across like multiple teams. And specifically we would like workers for the different feature teams to be handled within potentially the same workflow. And this may sound like an exotic requirement, but still a possibility. And we would like to understand, is there a possibility of proper authorization handling between those workflows, and how the namespaces are being handled in this case? So specifically, for example, we have this feature X that wants to have an access to namespace A, and then we have another feature Y that should have only read access to namespace, and then the feature Z would not have like an access at all. So just browsing through the docs, it seemed like some code changes are required, but maybe we're just missing something. So is this question clear at all? Does it make sense? And if the question makes sense.
So like, just so I can repeat it and make sure I understand, you're essentially asking if there's support for like RBAC on namespace level.
Pretty much, yes. Very good summary, Ryland. Yes.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. It's not supported in an explicit way where we don't really have a RBAC management within the platform. What we do provide, as you provided in the link, is a claim mapping solution where you can essentially use JWT-based authentication and get a JWT token and use the claim that's basically provided as part of that decrypted token and map it to one of the roles that we provide as part of the system. And so you could essentially say that, whatever comes in the JWT payload, I map that to the reader role, and only people, who get with that specific type of token will have the ability to read in a namespace. You obviously have to write the mapper yourself and actually handle this sort of translation. But other than that, as far as I know, you don't actually have to change your workflow or activity code.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This answers the question. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question on the Rust SDK. By the way, I just noticed I was on the wrong. I have my fancy mic here, and it was not using that. It was using AirPods. The status of the Rust SDK core. Do we have the people working on the Rust SDK core team here? Maybe not. Status is it's going. Jeremy, is there a specific thing that you wanted to ask about it?
Max should be able to answer it.
Max can answer it, but they're just asking for general status. It is being worked on. We're implementing more and more features. I'm not sure. I feel like the question could be more specific. Oh, Jeremy has no mic, so we can't. We use it. We actively dog food it. So Peter Rexer is the next question. He says, any update on when a TypeScript and JavaScript SDK might be available? We do not promise timelines, but you can actually see our development in the open. The whole thing's open source. So right now it's called the Node SDK. We're contemplating renaming it to the TypeScript SDK because that's what people are more interested in. But it is an SDK that supports TypeScript and JavaScript in Node. And you can follow along on this repo, Temporal.io SDK/Node. And it actively uses the Rust core. So the features are kind of developed in parallel. So if you're interested in the Rust core stuff, Jeremy, you can follow along that repo, or you can just follow on the SDK Node repo, because this is the first full SDK that's developed on top of the Rust core. Any follow-up questions, Peter?
There was already a follow-up question someone asked about Python. So I can answer that one. Yeah, right now there's no other SDKs that are in progress. We've already bitten off a lot just with the Rust core and the Node.js, especially because we're building those in tandem. So, the Node.js is the first consumer of the Rust core. And so that's taking a lot of our cycles right now. But the assumption is that, once we have Node.js and the Rust core in a stable place and we're happy with it, the overhead and barrier of entry for us to go and, add another language support, it's much, much less than it has ever been in the history of Temporal or even in Cadence. So I think that's something to look forward to, is that our velocity for new languages, once we choose to add them, it will become much, much faster once we have Rust core in place.
Yeah, we do keep track of people who are, using those things. So we know that your demand for Python and TypeScript is very, very high. So working on it, we don't promise deadlines. Thanks, Sunny. Okay, any other questions or any comments from Max or Rylands or Samar or anyone else on the Temporal side?
We always appreciate everyone joining us. So thanks for being here.
All right, well, I guess we're gonna end on the hour. Thanks so much to everyone for coming. And we're gonna keep pressing on with Temporal meetups. You can sign up to our meetups here on Luma, because it just sends it directly to your calendar and we don't have to invite you every single time. And you can follow up with Temporal on all of the social medias and the forums and the Slack. I think we're also trying to be more active on our YouTube as well. So we need your help to get to 1,000 subscribers so we can get a vanity URL. So please help us. I think we're at 601. We need 400 more. Then we can say, go to youtube.com/temporal. So that is my goal. Thanks everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful day. See you in the Slack.